Fellas, it's that time again. A new season, a new sandbox, and a lot of buffs and nerfs. Today, guys, I want to actually take some time to cover weapons that I want you to hang on to. Weapons that could potentially be nasty in the next sandbox. And by the way, big shout out to Advanced GG for giving us a 30% off promo code Aztecross30. Fellas, check it out. If you're looking to try out our flavor nasty, this is a great time to get it on discount. Now, let's talk weapons, guys, because yesterday, going through the TWAB, we kind of like broke down some of our thoughts as we were going through it. But I want to start with the weapon that's jumping out to me right now, and that's the last word. First, it actually begins with the perk change to hipfire. Hipfire is actually getting a widening there in its hipfire angle threshold. Now, if the wording of this sounds familiar, it's because you've probably seen it in a previous sandbox. Hipfire has actually been buffed before. Last word benefited from it last time. And if you play with last word, especially on controller, yeah, last word actually wrecks. Maybe not so much for mouse and keyboard users, but I think with this angle threshold expansion, and considering how significant it is, since Bungie gave us an example of that, last word is looking to benefit greatly here with these hip fire grip changes. And remember, last word would actually be present more in the meta if 120 round per minute hand cannons didn't get such a ginormous buff there in its range. But now that they're going to be reined in, they're getting a range nerf next season. You can bet your booty that last word will get the last word. You know what I'm saying? Which takes us to weapon number 2. Since we're on the topic of hip fire, let's also include a weapon that will be included in the linear fusion rifle buff. And that's actually Queenbreaker's bow. Yeah, when was the last time you heard about that weapon? It's a gun, and it exists as a heavy weapon that I think many of us overlook. Like when we think of linear fusion rifles, obviously we jump to Sleeper, and Sleeper's gonna be nasty, and we're gonna talk about it in just a moment. But DMG actually confirmed yesterday that yes, exotic linear fusion rifles will be included in the 15% buff that's coming to them, which was different than the rocket launcher buff. Again, the rocket launcher buff was a flat blanket buff to legendary rocket launchers, but completely skipped over exotics. Bungie actually went in there and intentionally tuned up exotics purposely to make sure they weren't too OP. Hence why Eyes of Tomorrow isn't Gallahorn 2.0. But now that it's been confirmed that exotic linear fusion rifles will be included in this blanket buff coming to linear fusions, well, that changes the game. Now, notice that the buff states that there will be an increase in precision damage by 15%. Precision damage, nothing else. But you will get a bump there also in reserve ammo. The main takeaway for that is Queenbreaker's bow with hipfire grip and that buff coming to hipfire grip, as well as having enhanced battery. This weapon is positioned to actually be a play inside of PvE. I know, you probably don't believe me. I don't believe me, but I'm hoping with the overall buff here to damage and simultaneously a buff there to consistency, Queenbreaker's bow might actually be a champion killing machine next season. Which takes us to the obvious choice when we talk about exotic linear fusions. Yeah, Sleeper Simulant. It's kind of poetic that Sleeper is like rotating back into the meta. We're getting Vault of Glass back. We're assuming eventually we're going to get King's Fall back. All these old D1 raids, it's only natural that Sleeper starts becoming a top tier choice yet again. Now, Sleeper's got a lot of things going for it. Number 1, just does a hell of a lot of damage. And number 2, the fact that his exotic perk allows you to over penetrate enemies and refract off of hard surfaces. There's a reason why so many people use Sleeper against Argos. That refraction, those multiple shots allows for bosses like these to get absolutely shredded by Sleeper. With this 15% buff, and if you happen to have the exotic catalyst, which really amplifies this weapon by dropping the charge time without hurting the damage. Again, this is something unusual, right? Because normally when you affect the charge time, the damage of the weapon actually changes. So normally when you increase the charge time, the damage increases. And when you drop the charge time, meaning a faster release of your shot, normally the damage dips off. But that's where Sleeper separates itself. Its damage stays the same, but with a faster charge time on that catalyst. Now, I'm not sure where the cat is even dropping these days. Is it from the Strike playlist? It used to drop from Spire of Stars way back when. Have no idea where it's at in the loot pool. Somebody feel free to confirm that for me in the comments below. Either way, Sleeper, yes, it may be the best weapon next season. Moving on, since we're still on the topic of linear fusion rifles, fellas, we gotta bring up Threaded Needle. Now, I have yet to do an individual review on this weapon, but I think Threaded Needle is number 1 by far the best option amongst legendary linears, simply because it can roll with things like Frenzy or Vorpal, although I will take Vorpal for boss damage. But number 2, it's a legendary. This unlocks your exotic slot. And Jay recently pointed out to me that Arbalest, when combined with Threaded Needle, could be one of the best DPS options. So imagine a damage phase going like this. You pull out your Threaded Needle with Vorpal and auto-loading holster. You unload on the boss in front of you. You then swap over to Arbalest. You unload your Arbalest into the boss, and then when you swap back to Threaded Needle, it's been auto-loaded. You're taking advantage of Vorpal weapon and its buff, and on top of that, you're taking advantage of the 15% buff to linears, fellas. This could be the damage-dealing weapon. And I know Arbalest is a special weapon, but it does does great damage as a special weapon. Either way it goes, lock down Threaded Needle, guys. It's dropping right now from Umbrals. Focus them, and ideally, if you can get the rolls, either auto-loading holster, Vorpal, field prep would probably be okay if you just want to single up there, but I would still prefer auto-loading holster. Frenzy, remember Frenzy's getting a nerf next season. It's still going to be good, and I love it on primary weapons, but how many times are you actually going to use this linear fusion rifles to take out trash ads? You see where I'm coming from? You're going to focus more on higher health targets. Now that we're still on the subject of linear fusions, and I feel like this video should just be called Linear Fusions to Lock Down Next Season, but let's bring up Arbalest, because Arbalest actually comes with the perk Disruption Break. Yes, I know its exotic trait states there that it does massive damage to elemental shields of enemy combatants. That's great and all, but if next season offers us a similar mod to what we were offered this season with our artifact and allows us to bust barrier champions with linear fusion rifles, oh boy, well this changes things. Arbalest, because it rolls with Disruption Break, and Disruption Break does work against barrier champions, it will self-proc for itself. Now this doesn't work unless we have a barrier champion mod for linear fusion rifles. Will Bungie grant us that? Maybe, I don't know. I will say I wasn't expecting it for sniper rifles, and they did it this past season. And it's obvious that Bungie's really trying to push us to use linear fusion rifles and Grandmaster content, so perhaps. Either way it goes, I would play it safe and still lock down this linear fusion. Which takes us to our next weapon on the list, our favorite 450 round per minute auto rifle, Shadow Price. It's actually going to be dropping next week, and I would highly suggest everyone get the adept version of this auto rifle. Now, here's the thing. We talked about it yesterday during the TWAB, where they mentioned that 450s were going to be getting a buff, and I wanted to make sure, following up after that TWAB, that this was not just a bump there in his body shot damage, but of course would be affected by his precision multiplier. Turns out that is the case, and it's being speculated that 450s next season will be hitting somewhere around 28.8 damage per crit, giving it a time to kill value of 0.8. Now, that's not the best TTK value, and it requires all crits, but it is a sizable jump from where it was, which was somewhere around like 0.93. And in comparison to other auto rifles, precisions will now match that of adaptives. But there's a lot of things really going for precisions and Shadow Price specifically. Number one, range stat, incredibly high. Number two, being a precision weapon means the weapon is way more vertical. You don't have to rock counterbalance or arrowhead break. Precision levels that gun out for you. And we've been preaching about it for a while now, about Shadow Price being one of the best feeling 450s in the game. Yes, I know there's other 450s, but Shadow Price feels fantastic. And if you want to check out a review for that one, go right ahead. But essentially, I love surplus on this weapon. The fact that the weapon is already super vertical, and you combine it with the stability and handling bumps from surplus, and already Shadow Price, there's just something about it, right? Like it has that D1 feel to it in its overall consistency. If there was ever a 450 to maintain that 0.8 second time to kill value consistently, it would be Shadow Price. And if you got the adept version, adept mods, fellas, as well as the stat bump from its masterwork. So overall, guys, Shadow Price is positioned to be rewarded the most from this 450 round per minute auto rifle buff. Now, another weapon on the list that I really want you to look out for, especially considering some of you are going to be grinding for Threaded Needle, is of course my favorite PvE SMG in the game right now, Extraordinary Rendition. The reason why I bring this one up, we already know it's good inside of PvE. I made a build essentially for PvE at the beginning of the season, essentially calling this weapon as one of the key components to my favorite build in the game. However, picked out from the TWAB yesterday, Subsistence is getting a very sizable buff where it no longer reduces reserve ammunition. On top of that, some machine guns will now receive the same ammo fraction per takedown as auto rifles. Originally, it was 10%. Now it will be 17%. Now, when talking about god rolls of Extraordinary here, I never really mentioned Subsistence. We talked about Surplus, Overflow, which I like all of those. But now, Subsistence has no downside. It just became S tier. And when combined with any of the damage dealing perks from Rampage to One for All, as well as Frenzy, yeah, I actually want a One for All Extraordinary now with Subsistence. Proc One for All, get the 30% buff, and go to Pound Town. Frenzy is good, don't get me wrong. I like Frenzy, and probably the biggest benefit is the reload buff that you get. But now the Subsistence doesn't hurt ammo reserves, and it's getting a buff there, and it's ammo refund on kill. This just screams at perks like Rampage or One for All. Overall, whatever your PvE role is for this SMG, it's still going to be good, but I would definitely consider locking in some of our Subsistence roles instead of doing what I think most of us has been doing for a very long time, which is just insta-sharding them. Which takes us to our next weapon on the list. This is actually tied more to the fusion rifle buff, and I got two of them. Stated in the TWAB, fusion rifles will receive a 2-meter buff at 0 range. So essentially, the lower the range of your fusion rifle, the bigger the buff. And when we actually look down the list of fusion rifles that have the lowest range, two of them jump out to us. Number one, obviously Bastion. Bastion has pretty piss poor range. range. However, it will benefit from this buff, and it just got a range buff. So Bastion's gonna get even more of a range buff. It won't be the full 2 meters, but it will be over a meter, which is plenty for Bastion. The only thing that may counter that is there is gonna be a increase in its fusion rifle spread. Those slugs, something like 13% more spread, what Bungie said. Is that gonna matter? I don't know. Would I take 13% more spread, but an extra meter to a meter and a half in range? Well, hell yeah! So if Bastion is annoying you now, I'm sorry to tell you this, it may be annoying you more even next season. But now that we're on the subject of fusion rifles, I do want to bring up another fusion rifle that has arguably the worst range in the game, and that is this Cartesian coordinate. It is the lowest range fusion rifle, meaning it should get the max benefits from this change, but simultaneously, look at the perks that it can roll with. Under pressure and high impact reserves. These are two of my favorite perks on fusion rifles, but the problem is they've been bugging out over like the past 6-7 months. Essentially, these perks were not proccing until you actually fire. Now, sometimes I felt like high impact would still proc, but yeah, it was bugging because the damage numbers didn't make sense. For instance, our frozen orbit that has high impact reserves, and we would sit there and one-shot body shot guardians would show a lower number, but it would still get the kill. So there was obviously some issues there, and we've known it for a while. Long story short, Cartesian here has the ability to have low range with simultaneously range boosting scopes, although I would choose something like Red Dot 2 MOA, where you still get that bump there in zoom, but not as much in that range stat. Again, you want to draw that range stat down a little more. And then, of course, under pressure and high impact reserves could be the combo to go for now that they're going to be getting fixed. This fusion rifle is on no one's radar, but it could be the sleeper meta going into next season. And if you want to rock it with Sleeper Simulant, go right ahead. Boom. Ultimate sleeper meta. We could be wrong. This fusion rifle could very well still be cheeks even next season, but I have high hope for it. And on top of that, it does come with Vorpal, so maybe this weapon could be an option for PvE. Bungie may actually introduce an artifact mod for fusion rifles instead of linear fusions, which if that's the case, fellas, just saying, you might want to lock in that trinary system, the Gambit fusion rifle. And I know a lot of us don't want to do Gambit, but next week we are going to be getting, what is it, double infamy? If Bungie actually presents us an artifact mod for fusion rifles against barrier champions, look no further than this fusion rifle with disruption break. Now, its range stat isn't just like incredibly high, but it is higher than that of Cartesian. It'll still see a nice little bump there in its range, but I'm looking at this more as a PvE fusion. Things like auto-loading holster and disruption break. Again, we're really banking on 1 or 2 weapons having an artifact mod being applied to either linear fusion rifles or fusion rifles. I really think it's going to be one of those. Could be wrong, could be shotguns, who freaking knows? But I'd rather be prepared. So if you do come across one of these fusion rifles, and we have not even reviewed it yet, if it has disruption break, keep it. Now, a last weapon on this list, and this is like our Hail Mary, our oh crap, this may actually be meta next season. Why Cross? Why did you not keep more of these? That's actually Braytech, the Braytech auto rifle. And the reason why I bring this up is Braytech's actually got a couple things going for it. Number one, it is a 450. It will receive the buff. It will have a 0.8 second time to kill value. Number two, it comes with dynamic sway, which is a fantastic perk for boosting stability and accuracy while holding down the trigger. But another thing that's got me interested in this is Elemental Capacitor. Here recently in the TWAB, Elemental Capacitor will now reward players rocking stasis. It used to not give any benefits. It gives recoil direction. It's not necessarily needed on a precision archetype weapon, but sure, we'll take it. The main thing is it reduces ADS move speed penalty. Now, originally when I read this, I guess I just saw something and thought something else. I thought that meant like the ADS speed. No, this is actually the move penalty while aiming down sight. Rocking stasis with Elemental Capacitor will allow you to still maintain that quick movement speed while aiming. This means Braytech might actually be positioned to be one of the best dueling 450 round per minute auto rifles next season. Again, I won't believe it till I see it, but maybe. And considering that you can also pair it with dynamic sway, you really don't need anything else there buffing its consistency. Could be wrong, guys. I scrapped a lot of Braytech auto rifles. It may come back to haunt us, but if you happen to have a Braytech with Elemental Capacitor, especially combined with dynamic sway, fellas, keep it and then let me use it next season. Now, a weapon I completely forgot to mention, but we might as well bring it up now, is Mida Multi-Tool. Mida, good lord, how did we forget this? Its exotic catalyst is being replaced. Instead of it granting Outlaw, which was the most useless perk that could be on Mida, it will now grant you no distractions. And no distractions is getting a buff. Will now activate a half a second faster and will offer more mitigation to flinch. This perk is genius on a gun like Mida, because number one, Mida comes with the Midar radar trait, which allows your radar to stay active while aiming down sights. That's kind of like the problem with no distractions on weapons, right? You give up your radar when you're aiming down sights. But Mida says, no, you want to be Elaine and Larry? Go right ahead. Aim down sights, no downside. You got your radar, you got buffs there in your movement speed. No distraction is now your exotic got a catalyst, you'll take less flinch. It's gonna be year one all over again. I'm saying it now, guys. Mida Multi-Tool. It's gonna piss some people off next season, but it will be effective. So guys, those are all the weapons that are just like jumping out to me. Let me know if I'm missing any. I've got a few in my arsenal that I'm still kind of like keeping back. Like, of course, Vigilance Wing, I think is gonna have a resurgence with 120 round per minute hand cannons getting a nerf. But overall, these are the guns that I'm really excited for. So guys, lock them down and even just scope through your vault because you may already have some of these god rolls. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.